When my son told me to find somewhere else to die, "You're useless now," I packed my bags like the obedient mother I'd always been. 4 days later, I was sitting in a lawyer's office, discovering that my supposedly loving husband had played the longest game of chess in history. Cassandra was about to learn that sometimes the pawn becomes the queen. And Brandon, he was about to discover that mercy wasn't something I had left to spare. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. Let me tell you how I went from homeless widow to the woman holding all the cards. Because, honey, this story has more twists than a pretzel factory. 2 months ago, I was Eleanor Price, devoted wife of 41 years and mother to one spectacularly ungrateful daughter. When William died of sudden cardiac arrest at 71, I thought my world was ending. We'd built a life together in our Laurelhurst Avenue home in Portland, one of those tree-lined streets where Mount Hood peeks through on clear days and neighbors still wave from their porches. What nobody knew was what I'd sacrificed to build that life. At 26, I'd been accepted into nursing school. Cassandra was 3. William convinced me to stay home instead. We can afford it, and Cassandra needs her mother. I gave up my dream of becoming a nurse. Then there was college. I'd planned to finish my degree once Cassandra was older, but William's consulting business needed help with bookkeeping, entertaining clients. Just for a few years, Eleanor. Those years became decades. And painting. God, I loved painting. William bought me expensive art supplies every birthday, but I never had time to use them. They sat in the closet, brushes hardening, paints drying out, physical symbols of dreams I'd deferred until someday. Someday never came, but it wasn't all sacrifice. William had his tender moments. Every anniversary for 41 years, he brought me wildflowers, not expensive roses, picked from the roadside on his way home from work. Store-bought flowers die too fast, he'd say. These are survivors, like us. I pressed one from each year in a book. After he died, I found he'd written dates on each page. For 41 years, William woke first and made my coffee exactly how I liked it, left it on the nightstand with a small note. After he died, I couldn't drink coffee for weeks, too painful. And once a year, on my birthday, he'd dance with me in our kitchen to our wedding song. No music needed. He'd hum it. Cassandra always rolled her eyes at this embarrassing display. Cassandra had always been Daddy's little princess, the one who could do no wrong. When she married Brandon Hartwell, that hotshot hedge fund investment banker, and started producing grandchildren, William doted on them all. Meanwhile, I was just the woman who cooked and cleaned and kept everything running smoothly. Just the wife. After the funeral, Cassandra swooped in during my grief like a vulture in designer clothes, cooing about how difficult this must be for me. "Mom, you can't possibly manage this big house alone," she'd said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "The stairs, the maintenance, all those memories. It's not healthy." I should have seen the calculation behind her concern. She'd bring Brandon over for family dinners where they'd corner me with real estate pamphlets and brochures for Cedar Hills Senior Living Community. "Mom, these places are wonderful. You'd have people your own age, activities, no responsibilities." What they meant was no inheritance to split, no inconvenient mother to deal with. But I didn't see it. I was grieving. I missed William's wildflowers and morning coffee and kitchen dances. I missed having someone who knew me when I was young. Cassandra isolated me slowly, carefully. "Mom, Dot is so negative. She's not good for you. Mom, you don't need book club. Stay home. Rest." I didn't realize she was cutting me off from my support system until it was too late. The final blow came 5 weeks after William's death. I'd been living in what Cassandra now called our house, still sleeping in the guest room because I couldn't bear to pack up our bedroom. Cassandra arrived unannounced with Brandon and 2 large suitcases. "Mom, we've made a decision. Brandon's firm is merging and we need to move into town immediately. This house is perfect for us." I stared at her, not quite comprehending. "Move in?" But this is my home. Cassandra's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the cold calculation underneath. Actually, Mom, according to Dad's will, I inherited everything. The house, the investments, all of it. I've been letting you stay here out of kindness, but it's time for you to find your own place. The words hit me like a physical blow. Cassandra, surely there's been some mistake. No mistake. Dad knew I'd take better care of his legacy than you ever could. You never understood money or investments. You were just the wife. Just the wife. 41 years reduced to those 3 words. That's when she delivered the killing blow, the one that would echo in my nightmares for weeks. Find somewhere else to die, Mom. You're useless now. I packed my things in a day. 41 years of marriage fitting into 2 suitcases and a small box of photos. Cassandra watched from the doorway, checking her watch like I was making her late for something important. There's a nice place on Cedar Hills, she offered with the enthusiasm of someone recommending a decent restaurant. Very affordable. I'm sure they have openings. Affordable. My daughter was inheriting $31.5 million, and she was suggesting I check into what was essentially a welfare facility for the elderly. Brandon loaded my suitcases into their Mercedes with the efficiency of someone disposing of garbage. Eleanor, you'll love having your independence again, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. No more worrying about house maintenance or property taxes. No more home, he meant. They drove me to the Pine Lodge Motel on 82nd Avenue, one of those places that charges $52 a night and asks no questions. Cassandra handed me $180 in cash, like she was tipping a hotel maid. This should cover you for a few days while you get settled. I'll have Brandon transfer some money into your account once we sort through Dad's paperwork, some money from my own inheritance. The Pine Lodge was exactly what you'd expect from a place charging $52 a night. Thin walls, thinner towels, a carpet that had seen better decades. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and cheap air freshener, that particular scent of desperation you can't quite mask. I opened the window, but Portland rain came in, so I closed it again. Sat on a bed that sagged in the middle like my life. Through the thin walls, I could hear other people's lives, a couple arguing, a baby crying. Someone's television turned up too loud. I realized I was listening to strangers because I no longer had a life of my own. After they left, I sat on the sagging mattress and tried to process what had just happened. In the span of 3 hours, I'd gone from grieving widow to homeless senior citizen. The woman I'd raised, loved, and sacrificed for had discarded me like an expired prescription. I opened my suitcase and saw a photo of Cassandra as a baby, sweet, innocent, loved. What happened? When did that baby become this? I held the photo and sobbed, not quietly but ugly, gasping sobs that shook my whole body. The first time I'd cried since William died. I cried for William, for myself, for my mother who died alone in a hospital while I was hosting a dinner party for William's clients. I cried for dreams in dried paint tubes, for Sophie and Lucas, for the baby Cassandra who no longer existed. My phone rang. Dot Richardson's name flashed on the screen. My neighbor, my friend of 20 years. I stared at it. Couldn't answer. Too ashamed. It went to voicemail. Ellie, honey, I haven't seen you since William's service. I'm worried. Call me, please. Whatever's happening, you're not alone. But I was alone. In a $52 motel room that smelled like failure. The night clerk, a tired-looking man named Ray Martinez, had noticed my distress when I checked in. You look like you've had a rough day, ma'am. Coffee's free in the morning. Small kindness from a stranger, which somehow made everything worse. Exhausted from crying, I looked in the bathroom mirror, saw an old woman with red eyes, gray hair, wrinkled face. This is who Cassandra sees, I thought. Useless, disposable. Then I thought, but I'm still here. I'm still breathing. I'm not done yet. But as I sat there in that depressing motel room, something began nagging at me. Robert had always been meticulous about his affairs, obsessively organized about important documents. He'd shown me the will years ago, explaining his wishes, making sure I understood everything, and I was absolutely certain that's not what it had said. William had been many things. Traditional, sometimes stubborn, occasionally patronizing about money matters, but he wasn't cruel. The man who'd held my hand through my mother's death, who'd surprised me with wildflowers every anniversary, wouldn't have left me destitute. The next morning, I used the motel's Wi-Fi to search for William's attorney, Harrison Fitzgerald. No, wait, Thomas Brennan, the same lawyer who'd handled our house purchase and various business matters over the years. His office was in the U.S. Bancorp Tower downtown, a 20-minute bus ride that would cost me precious cash, but felt necessary. I took that bus ride through Portland's gray morning, Mount Hood barely visible through the rain and clouds, past Powell's Books where William and I used to browse on Sundays, past the bridges spanning the Willamette River, past the life I thought I'd had. Thomas Brennan was a distinguished man in his 70s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. When his secretary announced that Mrs. Price was here about her husband's estate, he looked genuinely surprised. "Eleanor, my dear, I was wondering when you'd come in. I tried calling your house several times, but Cassandra said you were traveling." Traveling? That's what my daughter had told him. "Mr. Brennan, I need to ask you about William's will." He looked puzzled. "Of course. Didn't Cassandra provide you with your copy?" I gave her the original and several copies after the reading. My stomach dropped. There was a reading? Eleanor, you were supposed to be there. Cassandra said you were too distraught, that she'd handle everything and make sure you received your inheritance. The blood drained from my face as the reality hit me. "Mr. Brennan, I was never told about any reading. Cassandra told me she inherited everything." Thomas Brennan's expression shifted from confusion to alarm. He reached for a thick file folder, his movement suddenly urgent. "Eleanor, that's impossible. Your husband's will is very specific about your inheritance." He pulled out a document. I recognized William's neat signature at the bottom, witnessed and notarized. But as Thomas began reading, I realized Cassandra had lied about everything. I, William James Price, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath to my beloved wife, Eleanor Ann Price, the following: our primary residence at 1247 Laurelhurst Avenue, Portland, including all furnishings and personal effects. Additionally, I leave her 70% of all financial assets, investments, and accounts, totaling approximately $22 million. My head started spinning. $22 million. The house. 70% of everything. Thomas continued reading, his voice growing more serious. To my daughter, Cassandra Price Hartwell, I leave $9.5 million to be held in trust with distributions beginning on her 45th birthday, contingent upon her treatment of her mother following my death, contingent upon her treatment of me. William had known. Somehow he'd known exactly what Cassandra would try to do. "Mr. Brennan," I whispered, "Cassandra told me I inherited nothing. She moved into my house. She gave me $180 and suggested I find a senior facility." The elderly lawyer's face flushed with anger. "Eleanor, what Cassandra has done is called elder abuse and fraud. She's committed multiple felonies. But she had legal documents. She showed me papers, forged most likely, or documents from an earlier draft. Your husband updated his will 6 months before his death, specifically because he was concerned about Cassandra's attitude toward money and her sense of entitlement. The room was spinning. All those times Cassandra had dismissed my opinions, talked over me during family dinners, rolled her eyes when I tried to contribute to conversations about their expensive vacations or Brandon's hedge fund deals. William had been watching, evaluating, making decisions. There's more, Eleanor. The trust provision for Cassandra specifically states that if she fails to treat you with respect and dignity following my death, the entire $9.5 million reverts to you instead. I stared at him in shock. Are you saying? I'm saying your daughter just cost herself $9.5 million. Her inheritance is now yours as well. You're not inheriting $22 million, Eleanor. You're inheriting $31.5 million, plus the house and all personal property. The irony was so perfect, it was almost funny. Cassandra had been so eager to claim her inheritance that she'd triggered the exact clause designed to protect me from her greed. Thomas Brennan's office became command central for what he cheerfully called Operation Justice. He contacted the police, the banks, and a private investigator while I sat in his leather chair, still processing the magnitude of Cassandra's deception. Detective Maria Chen arrived within the hour. The forged documents are quite sophisticated, she explained as she reviewed the fake will Cassandra had shown me. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment crime. Someone planned this carefully. You think Cassandra had help? I asked. Almost certainly. Creating convincing legal forgeries requires specific knowledge and connections. We'll need to investigate whether Brandon or someone in his financial network was involved. Within 2 hours, every account had been frozen. Cassandra's credit cards, linked to what she thought were her new inheritance accounts, were declined. The house utilities, which she'd already transferred to her name, were suspended pending ownership verification. My phone rang at exactly 3:47 in the afternoon. Cassandra's name flashed on the screen. "Mom, where are you? There's some kind of mix-up with the bank accounts. They're saying Daddy's assets are frozen." "Hello, Cassandra. I'm sitting in Thomas Brennan's office. You remember him? Daddy's attorney, the one who read the real will to an empty room while you told him I was traveling." Silence. Then, "Mom, I don't know what you think you discovered, but..." "I discovered that you're a liar and a thief, sweetheart. I also discovered that your father was much smarter than either of us realized. You don't understand. I was protecting you from the complexity of managing all that money. You've never had to deal with investments or... I understand perfectly. You forged legal documents, committed fraud, and threw your 67-year-old mother out of her own house because you thought I was too stupid to notice." Her voice turned sharp, desperate. "Mom, you're confused. The grief has been overwhelming and someone is obviously taking advantage of your emotional state." The audacity was breathtaking. Even caught red-handed, Cassandra was trying to manipulate me. "Cassandra, dear, let me clarify something for you. Not only did you never inherit anything, but your actual inheritance, the $9.5 million your father left you, is now mine as well, thanks to a lovely clause he included about treating me with dignity and respect. That's impossible. Detective Chen is sitting right here if you'd like to discuss the impossibility of fraud charges with her." The phone went quiet. I could almost hear Cassandra's mind racing, calculating, searching for an angle. "Mom, please, can we meet somewhere and talk about this reasonably? I'm sure we can work something out." "Oh, we'll definitely be meeting soon, at the courthouse when you're arraigned. You wouldn't dare press charges against your own daughter." Something cold and final crystallized in my chest. "Watch me." I hung up and looked at Thomas, who was beaming with approval. "How long before she's arrested?" "Detective Chen has enough evidence for a warrant. They'll pick her up this evening. And Brandon, his financial records are being subpoenaed. If he participated in creating those documents, he'll face charges too." The police arrested Cassandra at 8:30 that evening while she was having dinner at Le Pigeon, apparently celebrating her inheritance with Brandon and another couple. According to Detective Chen, she screamed about false arrest and demanded to call her lawyer, who turned out to be Brandon's country club associate and had no experience with criminal law. Brandon was arrested at his office the next morning. The forensic accountant had traced the forged documents to a printing company Brandon's firm used for creating fraudulent investment prospectuses. Apparently, my son-in-law had quite the criminal resume that Cassandra either didn't know about or chose to ignore. Their bail was set at $45,000 for Cassandra and $175,000 for Brandon. I spent my first night back in my house sleeping in the master bedroom. Cassandra had already moved her belongings into the space. replacing William's careful organization with her chaos of designer clothes and expensive cosmetics. I packed everything into garbage bags and left them on the front porch. Let her collect them when she makes bail. The house felt different now, not because William was gone, but because I was finally seeing it as mine. For decades, I'd maintained it as William's sanctuary, designed around his preferences, his needs, his vision of how we should live. Now, looking around with clear eyes, I realized how little of me had ever been reflected in these rooms. That was about to change. 3 days after Cassandra's arrest, Brandon's mother showed up at my door. Patricia Hartwell was everything I'd expected. Perfectly coiffed, dripping with jewelry, and radiating the kind of entitlement that only comes from 3 generations of inherited wealth. Her family had made their fortune in Portland's timber industry, and she'd married into more old money. She'd never worked a day in her life and believed wealth equaled worth. "Eleanor, we need to discuss this situation rationally." I invited her in, curious to see what version of reality the Hartwell family had constructed to explain their son's felony charges. Patricia settled herself in my living room like she was granting me an audience. Brandon made some poor choices, obviously, but prosecuting him seems rather vindictive, don't you think? Vindictive? Your son helped steal my inheritance and threw me out of my own house. Brandon was following Cassandra's lead. He didn't understand the full situation. The woman was actually trying to blame my daughter for her son's criminal behavior. I had to admire the audacity. Mrs. Hartwell, Brandon created forged legal documents. That's not following someone's lead. That's conspiracy to commit fraud. Brandon's lawyer believes we can reach a settlement that benefits everyone. You get your house back. Cassandra faces appropriate consequences, and Brandon avoids the publicity of a trial. What kind of settlement? Patricia smiled, clearly believing she'd found an opening. Brandon's family is prepared to compensate you for your inconvenience. Let's say $1.8 million in exchange for dropping the charges against Brandon. $1.8 million to forgive the man who'd helped steal $31.5 million from me. Mrs. Hartwell, your son participated in a scheme that cost me everything I owned. You think $1.8 million covers that? Eleanor, be realistic. Brandon has a career, children, a reputation to maintain. Sending him to prison serves no one. It serves justice. Patricia's polished facade cracked slightly. Justice? You're destroying multiple families over money you'd never have known how to manage anyway. There it was. The same condescending attitude that had poisoned my relationship with Cassandra. In their world, I was just the help who'd gotten uppity. Patricia had always looked down on me. My father was an electrician. My mother was a teacher. Respectable, but not their class. Mrs. Hartwell, I think we're done here. Eleanor, please reconsider. $4.5 million. Final offer. $4.5 million to let Brandon walk free. The amount was staggering, but the principle was non-negotiable. My answer is no. Patricia stood, her composure completely restored. Very well. But you should know that Brandon's legal team has found some interesting information about your husband's business practices. It would be unfortunate if that became public during the trial. The threat was clear, but I felt no fear, only curiosity. What kind of information? The kind that might make you reconsider who the real criminal in this situation was. After she left, I called Thomas immediately. Margaret, whatever they think they found, it doesn't change the facts of Cassandra and Brandon's crimes. But could it affect the case? Potentially. If they can muddy the waters enough, create doubt about William's character or business practices, it might influence a jury. I thought about William, about our marriage, about all the secrets that might be buried in 41 years of shared life. Thomas, I want to know everything about William's business, every deal, every partnership, every potential irregularity. That evening, I sat in William's study, my study now, and began going through his files systematically. William had been meticulously organized, every document dated and categorized. But as I dug deeper into his business records, I began finding things that didn't quite make sense. payments to shell companies, consulting fees that seemed excessive, partnerships with firms that appeared to exist only on paper. By midnight, I'd discovered something that changed everything I thought I knew about my husband. The private investigator Thomas recommended was a sharp-eyed woman named Rachel Morrison who specialized in financial crimes. She spent 6 hours in William's study, photographing documents and building what she called the real picture of my husband's business empire. Mrs. Price, your husband was running a sophisticated money laundering operation through his consulting firm. We're talking about millions of dollars in illegal transactions over the past 11 years. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. That's impossible. William was the most honest man I knew. I'm sorry, but the evidence is overwhelming. He was washing money for organized crime families using his legitimate business as a front. I stared at the documents spread across William's desk, invoices for services never rendered, consulting contracts with companies that didn't exist, payment schedules that corresponded with known criminal activities. Mrs. Price, there's more. The $9.5 million William left Cassandra, that money came directly from laundered funds. If the FBI discovers this, they'll seize everything as proceeds of criminal activity. The room started spinning. Everything. The house, the investments, all of it. Unless Cassandra and Brandon's legal team already knows about this and is planning to use it as leverage, if they tip off the FBI about your husband's crimes, they might be able to negotiate immunity in exchange for cooperation. My daughter and her husband weren't just thieves. They were holding a nuclear weapon over my head. My phone rang. Cassandra's number. Mom, we need to meet tonight. There are things you need to know about Daddy that change everything. I already know, Cassandra. Silence. Then you know what? I know about the money laundering. I know about the criminal connections. I know that everything your father left us is tainted. Mom, listen to me carefully. Brandon's lawyers have been in contact with the FBI. They're willing to let us renegotiate our situation. What kind of renegotiation? Brandon gets immunity in exchange for providing information about Daddy's criminal network. You get to keep $5 million in the house. The rest goes to the government, and the fraud charges disappear. We all walk away from this mess. It was brilliant in a sociopathic way. Cassandra had turned my moral victory into her strategic advantage. Victoria, you're asking me to help you profit from your crimes by exploiting Daddy's crimes. I'm asking you to be practical. The alternative is losing everything and potentially facing charges yourself. I looked around William's study, seeing it clearly for the first time. The expensive furniture, the rare books, the art collection, all of it purchased with blood money. I need time to think. Mom, the FBI meeting is tomorrow morning. Brandon's lawyer needs an answer tonight. After hanging up, I sat in the darkness of William's study, surrounded by the evidence of his double life. 41 years of marriage to a stranger. A daughter who'd inherited more than money from her father. She'd inherited his talent for deception. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated who I was when my back was against the wall. I picked up the phone and dialed Rachel Morrison. Rachel, how quickly can you get me a meeting with the FBI? I have a story to tell them, and I think they're going to find it very interesting. FBI agent Jennifer Blake looked exactly like what central casting would order for a federal investigator, serious, intelligent, and completely immune to charm. She sat across from me in Thomas's conference room, recording our conversation and taking notes with mechanical precision. Mrs. Price, you understand that by coming forward voluntarily, you're potentially admitting to benefiting from criminal proceeds? I understand, but I'd rather tell you the truth than let my daughter and her husband manipulate this situation to their advantage. I laid out everything. William's hidden business, Cassandra's fraud scheme, Brandon's forgeries, and the extortion attempt masquerading as a settlement offer. Your daughter believes she can trade information about your husband's crimes for immunity from her own charges. That's exactly what she believes, and she thinks I'll cooperate because I'm afraid of losing everything. Agent Blake smiled for the first time. Are you afraid, Mrs. Price? Agent Blake, 2 weeks ago, I was a grieving widow sleeping in a budget motel. Today, I'm sitting here voluntarily confessing to federal agents about my dead husband's criminal enterprise. Fear is no longer my primary emotion. What is? Anger. Pure, crystallized anger at being manipulated by people who underestimated my intelligence for decades. Agent Blake's smile widened. Mrs. Price, would you be willing to wear a wire? 3 hours later, I was sitting in my living room with a recording device taped to my chest, waiting for Cassandra and Brandon to arrive for what they thought was a surrender meeting. They knocked at exactly 8 o'clock, both dressed like they were attending a business dinner. Brandon carried a briefcase that probably contained immunity agreements and settlement papers. "Mom, you look better than you have in weeks," Cassandra said, kissing my cheek like nothing had happened. "I feel better. Clarity has that effect." Brandon opened his briefcase with the efficiency of someone who'd conducted similar negotiations before. "Eleanor, our lawyers have structured this very favorably for you. You retain the house, $5 million in clean assets, and complete immunity from any charges related to Williams' activities." Clean assets. That's an interesting phrase. Cassandra shot Brandon a warning look. "Mom, the important thing is that we're all protected. The past stays buried and we all move forward. What about the $31.5 million William actually left me? Mom, that money is tainted. It can't be separated from Daddy's criminal activities. Taking $5 million is the best outcome possible. Kevin, help me understand something. When exactly did you discover William's criminal activities? What do you mean? Did you know about the money laundering when you married Cassandra? Or did you discover it recently when you were planning to steal my inheritance?" Brandon and Cassandra exchanged glances. "Eleanor, I don't think that's relevant to our current discussion. Actually, I think it's very relevant. Because if you knew about William's crimes and said nothing, that makes you an accessory after the fact. And if you only discovered them while committing your own crimes, that makes you remarkably unlucky." Cassandra's composure was starting to crack. "Mom, what are you getting at?" "I'm getting at the fact that you two have been planning this for months, possibly years. The forged will, the money laundering discovery, even Brandon's connections to document forgers. None of this was spontaneous. That's ridiculous." "Is it?" Agent Blake finds it quite plausible. The color drained from both their faces. "Agent Blake?" Brandon whispered. "FBI. She's been very interested in my story about systematic elder abuse, fraud, and extortion. Particularly the part where you tried to blackmail me with my dead husband's crimes." Brandon stood up abruptly, reaching for his briefcase. "Eleanor, this conversation is over. Actually, Brandon, I think it's just beginning." Agent Blake and 2 other federal agents entered my living room as Cassandra and Brandon sat frozen in place. The briefcase Brandon had been reaching for was confiscated immediately along with both their phones. "Cassandra Price Hartwell and Brandon Hartwell, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, elder abuse, and attempted extortion of a federal witness." Cassandra turned to me with an expression of absolute betrayal. "Mom, how could you do this to your own family? The same way you could forge legal documents and steal my inheritance, sweetheart. Except my way is legal." As the agents handcuffed them, Brandon tried one last desperate play. "Eleanor, you don't understand what you've done. There are people connected to Williams' business who won't appreciate federal attention. You've put yourself in danger." Agent Blake paused in reading them their rights. "Mr. Hartwell, are you threatening a federal witness? I'm warning her about the reality of her situation. The reality is that you just added witness intimidation to your charges." After they were removed, Agent Blake sat back down across from me. "Mrs. Price, Brandon's warning might not be entirely empty. Your husband was connected to some dangerous people." "How dangerous?" "The Moretti organization, primarily. They've been using legitimate businesses to launder money for decades. Your husband's consulting firm was one of their most successful operations. The name meant nothing to me, but the agent's expression told me everything I needed to know. Are you saying I'm in actual physical danger? Potentially. But there's something else you should know about your husband's operation, something that changes everything. Agent Blake pulled out a thick file folder, the kind that suggested months of investigation. Mrs. Price, your husband wasn't just laundering money for the Moretti organization. He was an FBI informant. The world tilted sideways. For 11 years, he was providing information about their operations while appearing to facilitate their money laundering. Deep cover, long-term investigation. The operation was so sensitive that even local FBI offices weren't informed. Your husband was helping us build cases against multiple crime families. But the money was real. The FBI allowed him to keep a percentage of the laundered funds as payment for his cooperation and to maintain his cover. Everything he left you was earned through legitimate federal cooperation. I stared at her, trying to process this revelation. So the $31.5 million is legally yours. Your husband died before the investigation concluded, but his cooperation over 11 years directly led to 52 arrests and the seizure of over $185 million in criminal assets. Why didn't anyone tell me? Because the investigation was ongoing and because we weren't certain about your involvement or knowledge. Your daughter and son-in-law's fraud scheme actually helped us confirm your innocence. Cassandra and Brandon didn't know any of this. They suspected criminal activity but had no idea about the federal cooperation. They were planning to blackmail you with information that would have actually exonerated your husband. The irony was so perfect, it was almost poetic. Cassandra had tried to steal my inheritance twice, once through fraud and once through blackmail based on incomplete information. Agent Blake, what happens now? Now you get your money back, your daughter and son-in-law face federal charges, and you get to decide what kind of life you want to build with your legitimate inheritance. And the danger Brandon mentioned? The Moretti organization will be too busy dealing with their own legal problems to worry about you. We're executing search warrants across 3 states tomorrow morning. I looked around my living room, seeing it again as the site of my resurrection rather than my humiliation. Agent Blake, can I ask you something? In your professional opinion, am I a terrible person for feeling satisfaction about Cassandra's arrest? Agent Blake smiled. Mrs. Price, in my professional opinion, you're a woman who refused to be victimized. That's not terrible. That's inspiring. 7 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my renovated house making coffee for 2. The morning sun streamed through new windows that actually opened properly, illuminating countertops I'd chosen myself for the first time in 41 years. Good morning, Eleanor. Dr. Amanda Foster, Rachel's sister and my new financial advisor, appeared in the doorway carrying a thick folder of investment reports. Good morning, Amanda. Ready for our quarterly review? The past 7 months had been a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media interviews, and personal transformation. Cassandra and Brandon were each serving 16-month federal sentences. The news coverage of their crimes had made me something of a celebrity in senior advocacy circles. Your portfolio is performing excellently, Amanda said, settling at my new breakfast table. The charitable foundation is fully operational, and the scholarship fund has already selected its first recipients. The Eleanor Price Foundation for Elder Protection had become my primary focus. Using $14 million of my inheritance, we were funding legal aid for seniors facing family financial abuse and supporting legislative changes to strengthen elder protection laws in Oregon. We'd helped a 73-year-old man whose son had forged power of attorney and sold his father's house. The man got his house back. The son was prosecuted. Any word on the documentary? HBO Max confirmed the production deal. They want to start filming next month. My story had captured media attention far beyond the initial news coverage. The Mother's Reckoning, an American crime story, was being developed as a limited series with the proceeds going to elder advocacy organizations. And Cassandra? Amanda's expression grew careful. She's written again. Her lawyer says she wants to apologize and ask for forgiveness. Cassandra had written 14 letters from federal prison. I'd read the first few, which ranged from self-justifying to desperate, before deciding to stop opening them. Some relationships once broken can't be repaired with words. Has my stance on that changed? Not according to our previous conversations, but people do evolve, Eleanor, even people who've made terrible choices. I thought about the woman I'd been 7 months ago, grieving, dependent, willing to accept whatever scraps of dignity my family offered me. That woman might have felt obligated to forgive Cassandra, to rebuild a relationship based on guilt and tradition. But that woman was gone. Amanda, schedule a meeting with Cassandra's lawyer, not to reconcile, but to make something clear. What kind of thing? I want Cassandra to understand that her actions had consequences beyond legal punishment. I want her to know that she destroyed our relationship permanently, and that her children will grow up knowing why their mother went to prison. That seems harsh. Good. It's supposed to be harsh. Cassandra made adult choices that hurt people she was supposed to love. She doesn't get to escape the emotional consequences just because she's written some prison letters. The doorbell rang. My neighbor Dot Richardson stood on the porch with her usual warm smile. When I'd finally called her from the motel, she'd driven straight over, saw my face, and just held me while I cried. Ellie, I've known you 20 years. You're the strongest woman I know. You just forgot for a while. Welcome back. When I'd agonized about cutting off Sophie and Lucas, Dot had said, Ellie, you're not punishing those babies. You're teaching them the most important lesson. Actions have consequences. Cassandra never learned that. Sophie and Lucas will. Because of you, they'll grow up knowing right from wrong. That's love, honey. Hard love, but real love. My relationship with Cassandra's children would be based on their choices when they're adults, not their mother's rehabilitation efforts. After Amanda left, I walked through my house. Really, my house now, decorated according to my taste, organized around my priorities. In the art studio, I uncovered my latest painting, a self-portrait of a woman standing in bright sunlight, her face turned toward the future. The woman in the painting looked nothing like the grieving widow who'd packed her life into 2 suitcases 7 months ago. This woman looked powerful, independent, unafraid. She looked like someone who'd learned that the best revenge isn't getting even. It's becoming everything your enemies never thought you could be. Outside, the sun was setting behind trees I'd planted myself in soil that belonged to me. On property I'd defended through intelligence and courage rather than inherited through marriage or birth. Tomorrow, I'd continue building the life I'd chosen rather than the life others had planned for me. And if Cassandra wanted to rebuild a relationship with this woman, she'd better bring a lot more than prison letters and hollow apologies. She'd better bring a complete transformation, one that matched my own. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.